I should take a microphone. I already saw Naomi panicking. We had a very nice welcome. Thank you for setting us up here. Spouw 25 is the podium for Amsterdam, for the city and for the citizens. So I'm very happy that you are joining us today. We are opening this evening a series of events that we have themed around sustainable digitalization, and we want to focus on data infrastructures. These are the infrastructures on which the cloud, for example, runs today. And I'm happy for tonight's panel that is here. We had unfortunately 2 last-minute cancellations due to grave health reasons, so I ask you to apologize this. Nevertheless, we are a very well-stocked panel, and I'm glad to introduce the panelists in a moment. I'm Christina Irion. I am Associate Professor at the Institute for Information Law. I'm a lawyer. What do I know about data infrastructures? Well, a little bit, because I have been studying cloud computing from a legal perspective over the last quite some time now, especially the aspects of data sovereignty and also about what rights we have over data that reside in the cloud. And recently I have moved on to the sustainability aspects of cloud computing with a very nice interdisciplinary project, and you will hear a bit later about that. Now, let's give the other panelists a chance to introduce themselves shortly. Pepijn, please.
Yes, well, Pepijn indeed. I'm a master student of the Artificial Intelligence program at the University of Amsterdam. And besides that, I'm doing research together with Anna Oprescu on the energy consumption of privacy-enhancing techniques, such as synthetic data. But it's really technical. I won't bother you with that tonight. And apart from that, I'm also active within Extinction Rebellion because I'm very concerned about the climate crisis.
Hello, my name is Becky Kazansky. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Political Science Department here at the University of Amsterdam. And I have been working the last 14 years with different kinds of digital rights, civil society groups focused on issues ranging from surveillance up to sustainability. And over that time, my focus has become around this question of what does just governance look like? So governance that puts human rights and social justice at its center. When we think about the intersections of digital rights and climate justice. So that's what I'll be talking about tonight.
Yeah, hello everyone, my name is Max. I'm German as well. We have that already, found that out already. I originally come from tech, so I worked in the tech industry for more than 15 years. And 5 years ago decided to start a nonprofit, not knowing anything about nonprofits and the civil society sector, because I felt like the stuff I was building every day was not really actually helping the climate crisis or solving any real human problems or my problems for that sense, and became really obsessed with digging into data infrastructures. The nonprofit is called the Sustainable Digital Infrastructure Alliance, so the words that you hear tonight are already in the name. So I hope that we can have a nice debate and conversation together.
So thank you. I find it always very relaxing that there are people who actually know how to talk about cloud computing in addition to a lawyer perspective. So I thought we structured the evening the following way. I brought a very, very brief presentation, and then we allow our panelists to make a short and hopefully a provocative statement and give some additional information. We will shortly discuss after that, and then we quickly move towards an open discussion with you in the audience, because this is the whole point of the evening, that we are also inviting your views, your questions, and that we are able to have a debate about the sustainability of cloud and data infrastructures. Yeah? So if you don't mind, I'm going to give it a start. And we will start with Operation Tulip, because this encapsulates really in a wonderful way the trouble that we have experienced with a particular way of introducing and authorizing cloud infrastructures here in the Netherlands. It's a good example because, first of all, it had a very secretive touch to it. So it was called Operation Tulip, and Meta, the big company that is the owner of Facebook and of Instagram and of WhatsApp, for example, only revealed at a very late stage that they are actually behind this development. And it has been a development in a rather small Dutch neighborhood. And here the local government was actually charged with making decisions about a data center that has impact on power consumption, energy consumption, water, and land that is beyond actually the boundaries of this small community. And after this data center development became known, there was also local resistance. A number of people in this small neighborhood have become active. There have been protests. It was also a local election where then a new party has become elected. The province and also the Dutch government became involved. So it became really a big affair, and in the end it exploded or imploded, and Meta withdrew its engagement in this for the development of this so-called hyperscale data center. Hyperscalers are enormously large data centers, and they are serving the interests of one particular company. In this case, it would have been Meta. But of course, we have to see that they are also serving many of us because we are using these services. Yeah, we are using the services of Meta, and therefore, in a way, it's also an infrastructure that is not just exclusive to one company in the way how it is then distributed. In any case, it also laid bare that we are very badly equipped to deal with the demand for more data center development. And especially here in the Netherlands, we are having at least one hyperconnectivity area, that is the city of Amsterdam or the region of Amsterdam. And there are several other areas where data centers can at the moment be developed. And the demand is huge, and a lot of applications have been filed with local governance for further data center development. This is the project that we have conceived of 2 years ago. The idea was that data centers are a very nice inflection point for different policy objectives, such as industrial policy, like attracting data centers, supporting the digitalization of society, the digital transformation, but also data sovereignty concerns that where the EU and also some of its member states are very vocal about. But in the end, there's also this particular objective of sustainability. If we have digital infrastructures, data infrastructures, that we want them to be sustainable. And we have a very complicated governance setup that we call European multi-level governance. That means that competences for various key competences that all are needed in order to develop data centers, that they are distributed at EU level, who is doing, for example, energy efficiency policy. That we have also the member state, EU member state, like the Dutch government involved. They have been, until some years ago, using also the Dutch investment funds to still attract data centers to the Netherlands, which has now stopped. But they are also having a very strong industrial policy where they are trying to attract the establishment of this industry, also with a view that it is interesting and important for digital transformation of Dutch companies and of the Dutch society. Then we have provincial competences and also the cities that are mostly involved and with authorizing new data centers. So this makes a very fascinating setup because it doesn't come automatically together. Everybody, as you say, many cooks are not always making a good meal. And this coordination is improving slowly, but there is, of course, still a lot of contestation when we talk about data centers. Should there be, for example, a difference be made between hyperscaler data centers of these very large American tech companies or between co-location data centers that serve local businesses, administrations, the university, for example? So we thought we bring different competences together, and this project has been conceived together with Ans Kolk from the Amsterdam Business School, Stefania Melan from the media department at the University of Amsterdam from the humanities faculty, and I from the lawyers. And we have also built a conceptual framework how we can analyze this, and have published several papers out of this project. But the interesting thing is that we thought we have to go and see a data center, right? You can hardly study this without having seen it. So we made an excursion, and I can assure you that this was the most interesting photo from everything we did, because the others are just like server racks, yeah? It's rather boring. So we went together with a number of colleagues to visit the data center that was in Almere, the North Sea data center, that was inviting us, and we are grateful that we could see that. And the interesting part about the data center is that there's really nothing to see. You hear sometimes a little bit this humming of these servers, and then you hear on another rack some really heavy like buzzing. So the server is doing something, but you have no idea what they are doing. And what I found fascinating was that there could be no match burning inside the data center, because they reduced the oxygen levels so much that fire could not actually combust in this environment. But as a human, you can still survive. We also went downstairs where there were the backup diesel generators. That was actually something I wasn't so really consciously aware about, that basically we had, there were like a battery of 20 diesel generators. They are always working in standby, because in an event that the electricity is an outage, that they can take up in order to ensure continuity of this data center. This is something that hopefully prospectively can be changed, that we can work with, for example, batteries, but right now there were diesel generators, just in case. So data centers are causing a number of concerns when we think about their sustainability. The most prominent, discussed also in the media, is of course their energy consumption. That is actually quite huge and can be measured in the equivalence of small European countries, and this is on the rise. And obviously you can try to make that carbon neutral by using sustainable energy sources to power data center. But then the question is, do we have enough sustainable energy? Who produces it? Should all the sustainable energy we are producing right now go into the power consumption of data centers? So there are dilemmas, I would say, yeah, the dilemmas that are interesting from a governance perspective. We have also issues with the still used second fallback source for producing energy in case the general grid doesn't produce. And then we have a rather thirsty technology, because the data centers are consuming lots of water, mainly for cooling, and they are not polluting water, but the water simply evaporates unless they are using very modern technologies where this is a closed circuit where the water cannot evaporate. There are also ideas to make that more sustainable by, for example, feeding that into the heating of houses. And finally, data centers produce a large amount of electronic waste, because there is a short lifespan of these servers and also of the GPUs, graphic processing units, who have to be exchanged after every couple of years and so. What is not on the slide is, of course, also the land, the soil that data centers occupy, and possible other conflicts over social needs, social goods, public value, and so forth. To round that up, there is a very strong increase in the demand in especially electricity and also water consumption by the introduction and mainstream use of artificial intelligence. That is mostly machine learning technologies. They are on the rise, and each of these sophisticated models consumes for the training phase already a lot of energy, but also every query, every image that we generate with these artificial intelligence image generators is going to use energy. So we can already predict now how this will look in a couple of years, and so whatever offsets we are producing now by being more energy efficient, by creating less carbon intensive use of these data centers, will be offset by the sheer growth in data center capacity of this sector over the next 5 to 10 years. Yeah? So much that Sam Altman from OpenAI says that we need an alternative energy source, but nobody has that right now. This evening is the beginning of the events that we are also planning in the next 2 days. We are going to have an academic conference that starts tomorrow afternoon with a lot of experts from different fields, and we are going to deal with these 4 topics. The European Green Deal, so basically how sustainability and digitalization can go hand in hand, and if that is possible, and somebody maybe has to also give in a little bit. We will look at data centers at the crossroad, which is going to look how data centers, the business, the industry themselves is trying to actually change and improve and become more sustainable, because important work is also here going on. We will also look at the policy dialogue and how civil society can actually be meaningfully involved in this debate and the discourse about data center policy at local, at regional, and at national levels. And finally, we will have a more technical panel where we discuss energy value trade-offs, and then you will see some of us tomorrow again. And with this, I want to start our panel discussion. I gave you already a little bit of background, so the lawyers will be needed because this is certainly not a lawless area. In fact, there are a number of regulations already applying now. The brand new EU AI Act, for example, mandates that, once it enters into force, mandates that all generic AI systems, that they must also disclose the consumption of energy and of natural resources of this whole AI system over the whole life cycle. So there is an important transparency obligation, and I believe this is the beginning. But there are also regulations on the EU level on the energy consumption and several other requirements that are formulated in the Netherlands or at member states level for the establishment of data centers. With this, we go to the panel, and I would like to start with Becky. Becky, you wanted to also tell us about the obligations and the greenwashing and the labeling of these data centers and AI.
Thank you so much. So tonight I'm going to be, my remarks are based on 2.5 years of research and collaboration with civil society organizations like the Association for Progressive Communications, APC, some research that I also led with an organization called the Engine Room, which explored intersections between digital rights and climate justice, and a broader coalition of organizations that has been involved in really trying to trace clear links between topics that usually fall under digital rights, which is around privacy, data regulations, surveillance, things like that, and connecting them more clearly to sustainability questions. So I want to speak to one of the most recurring and important themes that has come up through this work. And it has been around the need, first of all, to get clear on what we, as different communities involved on these issues, what do we actually mean by sustainability? What does green mean? And is that the same thing then as climate justice, for example? So is sustainability always compatible with different kinds of social justice and human rights? And it's a bit of a complex picture, and it speaks to what you just mentioned about questions of greenwashing. And I also think that you set up really well some of the issues and contestations that are coming up around data centers in terms of water issues, energy intensiveness, land, and all these other kinds of things. And And so this question of then what do we mean by green and for whom really becomes central to developing a vision for a more sustainable cloud industry then as well. One of the things that has been pointed out often is, and there's been great research done by civil society organizations like Greenpeace and others over the years, is the claims around sustainability. There have been a lot of them made in recent years by big tech companies. So lots of claims around climate neutrality. There's every year there's a new word that comes into circulation, most recently perhaps water positivity, which is the idea that even though water consumption is increasing, I think 35% per year for one of the big tech companies that is expanding its data centers at the moment, somehow this is actually going to be a net positive for the ecosystem, for cities, for lands. And so there's this real question of what actually does water positivity mean when the city adjacent to which the data center has been built has actually run out of water, and there's now a drought, and they're bringing in water in trucks. What does water positivity mean then? I think it's an open question, and that is what people from the climate justice movement are asking, or climate justice movements, because there's many. And it's also what digital rights civil society groups are asking more and more as well. So I will just end my opening remarks with this question then of how, if greenwashing is such a concern, what actually are the options to address this? And there are many. It starts with having conversations like this. There's also at different levels of governance, many different kinds of interventions happening. I'll just mention one, which is the EU Green Claims Directive, which is on its way to perhaps eventually becoming enforceable, not yet. But it would, at an EU level, kind of put into the hands of consumers the ability to challenge a corporation on its claims of sustainability and climate neutrality. And there, it seems there's at once an opening, and on the other hand, a need to really not just push for policy reform, but policy transformation and policy revolution, perhaps, because there are places where more could be done. And one example there that I think comes up all the time in discussions about greenwashing is this a tool that we call carbon offsets, carbon credits, renewable energy credits. So these are tools of climate governance that have become so central, so important to how we understand addressing climate change. And yet, in a series of recent studies, have shown to be at least 95% either completely ineffective or actually patently harmful, violent, colonial, forcing indigenous nations off their lands in order to make room to grow trees, which then burn down in forest fires because the ecosystem around it is no longer even sustainable. So there's a lot here to unpack, but there's a question then around at an EU level, and obviously it's not just the EU level where this is a concern then, but with the Green Claims Directive, it wants to, for example, clamp down on certain kinds of carbon offset projects that seem to be ineffective. But what it doesn't do is to question fundamentally whether carbon offsets ever really work or are actually an effective tool of governance. So I would say my provocation is that we need to ask for more in our policy interventions and to really push for governance that would get us more towards climate justice and not just ideas of sustainability. Thanks.
Thank you, Becky. I also saw that on the website, that they are carbon negative, climate neutral, and water positive, whatever that means. Pepijn, can I ask you to give us your perspective on these dilemmas?
Yes, I was just thinking that today I read in the news that Air France KLM actually lost a court case about greenwashing, about exactly these carbon offsets. And also, while I was thinking of that, I think that's a very clear case of greenwashing, but then there are also a lot of cases of greenwashing that are probably, if we look at it from a legal perspective, are okay. But for example, I saw recently on a pack of milk, on our way to planet proof. What is that? Can anyone tell me maybe what is on our way to planet proof? So it's not there yet, but we're on our way. I mean, it's a completely empty statement, but it will probably give some feeling of, oh, hey, this is more sustainable than something else. And I think these things are really damaging actually what we should be doing, which I will also address in my talk a bit. So yeah, I think this is very interesting food for thought, and definitely something to which I say we could be a bit more strict in our policies.
Yeah. But this presupposes also that we are able to concrete measure what the impact of a data center is, and also that we have actually agreed benchmarks so that we are able to compare between different data centers how they fare in terms of sustainability. And I believe that this is where we are at the moment not having agreement, and that there are various different standards operated, and there are per company using also different ways of measuring their impact, and that it is very, very difficult to really compare one data center with another, or to compare a group of data centers in another country with here. So this is of course a way of obfuscating the impact. It's very difficult. But I believe there's important work ongoing. But first of all, I would like to invite you, Max, to explain us a little bit how you see the data center problematic in relation to sustainability.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Two things on the data point. I think it's important to point out the irony that the industry that's responsible for data, right, doesn't have data on its own environmental impact. I think that's always quite ironic, and that they're having a hard time measuring things, even though they deploy sensors on all of your stuff, but then they can't measure their stuff. Also a bit ironic. The other thing I have to say is the humming. The humming is really important. Roy here used to work at North Sea, so he knows the humming, and we engineers, we can hear the code, right? We just put our ear to the server, and we know what's going on. We hear the data, and we know if something is wrong, and just to get you laughing a bit, otherwise we get too serious. Now, I have a lot of criticism of data centers. I can talk a lot about that, but I thought I'll start with an alternative vision, right? So we have cloud, and you already mentioned the word hyperscale, right? Comes from the same people that gave us hyper-processed food, which we're also not super big fans of these days. And I would argue that the problem with hyperscale is first of all, it's really not what we want. I think what we really want, if I'm a software engineer, I want to buy local. I want to buy from a local data center in Amsterdam. If there were a cloud of Amsterdam, that would be cool. If I could build my startup on top of local infrastructure that's well integrated into the energy system, where the heat is recovered, the water goes in a circle. And I think that's really possible. And I can show you like a list of European, very small hosting companies that can actually do this, right? So what's the problem, right? How do we have more regional cloud? How do we have more of a regional ecosystem? And I think that's why we need the lawyers, because we need regulation for that, right? And why do we need regulation? There's a great example. Ofcom, the regulatory agency for telecommunications in the UK, made a really amazing report. It's more than 300 pages on the competitiveness of the cloud market. And first of all, when you see that Amazon makes about 42% on a dollar return on capital employed, you understand why they want to build more, because it's a very profitable asset class to put your money into. But it also shows that it's not a competitive market. And that report really clearly, they interviewed so many businesses that said, we don't compete with them. We are not going to try to build a regional cloud. We're not going to try to invest in that field because we can't compete. And so we have I say it out loud, I think a lot of people don't like that, but for me it's an oligopoly of cloud providers. It's to me like a cartel. I've been in the US at meetings where they plan their infrastructure together, which is, as a European, you're like, wait a second, I think you're not allowed to do that. That's anti-competitive behavior. And I think it starts with unlocking that market so that other people who can build more regional, more integrated, better infrastructure, better data centers, have a space to get into it and can actually compete on environmental sustainability. They can really outperform, can be more transparent, more accountable, but it requires a market, and right now there is no real market that you and I can create a company and really can compete in that space. And I think that's the real systematic problem that we need to address.
Good, so competition as the key mechanism to unleash also powers to compete on sustainability is your position. Yeah, that's interesting, and it is also true when we think about this other objective to create or to build more sovereignty for EU digital technologies, and that would also, of course, cover data center capacity. So first of all, I believe we have to recognize that you cannot have an EU sovereignty data infrastructures and at the same time be against cloud computing. Yeah? You have to have both together. And we will also need cloud to go through this digital transformation in order to not be behind, but also not be fully dependent on foreign providers. But if I understand you correctly, the foreign providers are actually building clouds also here in Europe, and they are gobbling up, if I see that correctly, these abilities to construct data centers. But does that have then any? Now, when I read the discussions, also the discussions at the policy level, then there's often the debate that they say, if we ban a data center here, then this will be bought or built somewhere else. It's not effective. So what is your...
I think that's true. I think there's a lot of mystery around where and why data centers are in certain regions. Amsterdam, obviously, for connectivity, Frankfurt the same. But then now you see power price with AI is becoming a lot more interesting, so you see a lot of people moving to Norway and Sweden because it's just cheaper energy there. I think, though, like to even make it even simpler, I think the problem is at the moment we are never having a conversation, do we want digitalization to be the solution for everything? Because that's like a given. We say climate will be solved by digitalization, social injustice will be solved by digitalization, and as long as that's the claim, then we will need more infrastructure because digitalization runs on energy like every other thing on this planet. And these things are not made from wood and paper, right? Obviously. And so I think either we have a discussion, do we want this industry to expand? And if that's not a discussion, then I think we should immediately foster competition in the infrastructure space so that people compete on who can build the most sustainable infrastructure. Because otherwise, the way it's built right now, there's some of my friends who build data centers here, can attest you that that's not the core priority right now when you build a data center. It's speed and cost. That's what matters.
Okay, and how do you want to introduce competition? Because as you said, the market is highly concentrated and there is no way of commanding competition.
I think, so I really like the energy sector because we did a lot of things there to create competition. We unbundled the energy sector so that we created markets. So you can't own the grid and a power plant and sell at the same time energy to consumers. So that created competition. And I think if you really look at it, right, the cloud providers are a bookstore, a social network, an enterprise software company, and a search. Right? And they also happen to own 30 or 40% of the world's infrastructure. So they're vertically integrated. So the first step is to unbundle them, right? And I think with the European market, the European single market, you can say, look, Google, you can do search, you can do fiber, or you can do the data centers. You pick, but you can't do all three. And yeah.
I understand the claim, but I also must say that from the legal side of things, this is not easily done. Yeah? And the EU has decided to adopt regulation for very large online platforms, very large online search engines, and for the most powerful companies that is in the Digital Markets Act and in the Digital Services Act. So they are trying to introduce competition through regulation without breakup. Okay, but now let's try to focus a bit back on the sustainability aspects. But I see your point, of course, that more competition would also be beneficial to that. But I want to go back to your claims and a position about greenwashing and holding them accountable, asking for more transparency. Will that be enough, that we know exactly about every data center, what it consumes, what it needs, what energy demands it has, and all the other data? What would happen? Imagine we know it all.
That's testing. Yes, that's a that's a great question, and I think your question kind of hints to a particular point around transparency and this question of how much do we really need to know before kind of acting on the issue of climate change. And I think that is a discussion that comes up a lot in scientist communities, within academia, but also in terms of industry regulation and things like that. And I think in all of the discussion and collaboration I've had also with transparency advocates, working on digital rights and sustainability issues over the last decade plus, I think the answer has always been that yes, transparency can be a starting point, but without meaningful accountability, it's toothless. Because transparency is always a moving target. One thing is revealed, another thing is now not known, and in the meantime, the language that we use to discuss it evolves. The practices evolve, and it becomes this continuous dance. So I think the answer might be yes, transparency is important, but in the end, climate change is not a matter of, it's not an information scarcity issue. Like, we already have the information we need to act on the most important things. And so I think that's a point that comes up a lot if you take kind of a critical perspective also on the role of technology and data in relation to climate. So, yeah.
Thank you. Which brings me to the next question. I mean, the society is composed of many different sectors, and you could now start discussing who has to start making a contribution first. We are sitting here now with the data centers, and of course there we can still improve a lot in terms of sustainability. But is that really the biggest concern right now compared to transport or to the flying and other sectors? Is it that we are now overly worried about one sector like data centers, or is this sector something that we should right now start building safeguards and guardrails into the regulation so that this growth that we are seeing can be managed? Would you like to take that?
Yeah, I think that ties very well to my message indeed. Because, well, what I'm doing my research on is the energy consumption of data centers, amongst others. And for now, the global energy consumption, about 7% is being used for information, what is it, ICT, the information communication technologies, I think. Oh, sorry, what is nonsense? Yeah. Okay, well, I have one paper.
Look, every data center that I know refuses to report their energy consumption, so all of these numbers are based on mathematical models. And yes, the Dutch CBS has some data, self-reported data. So there is a lady who works at the Dutch Omgevingsdienst who collects this kind of data, and even she agrees that this data is not complete. Which makes it, again, we failed at actually bringing transparency to the Energy Efficiency Directive, because all the data center reports is POE, which is like reporting profit margin without telling me your revenue and your cost.
Okay, I'm the moderator. I take it back, okay? I think it's great that we have a debate. I have also brought the numbers with me. I don't have a 7. It depends also how much you want to include in this sector. But there was a recent release of a report of the International Energy Agency from 2024, and I foresaw this discussion that we are going to go into the percentages. And so I thought I bring the percentages with me. And we know that it was 3% at the moment of the whole global energy consumption is produced according to this official report. And they are saying that it will be growing quite significantly in the future because of the quadrupling of data center capacity. So we are going to look forward to a much higher share that is not yet known, yeah, but a much higher share. And we have this study from Alex de Vries. He was using all sold GPUs units, and he basically said if all of them, these GPUs, are used for data for AI, then this will be needing a high energy demand that would be as much as all the energy that Sweden consumes in the year 2027. Sweden is a big country, and it is significant if we need to really be cautious and careful about energy consumption overall. Discussion starts. One more here, and then I open the floor. And also to you. Yeah, agree? Good. Let's go back to you. Is it possible to exactly measure what is consumed in terms of energy by any application that runs on cloud? And how do you do that?
Well, not exactly. I think what may be the misunderstanding here is indeed it was the electricity consumption. I don't know, maybe I said energy. Yeah, sorry. That's a misunderstanding then, but it's 7% of the global electricity consumption. And then the estimates are, because indeed it's very unknown, that it's about 3 to 4% of greenhouse gas emissions. But the sector is growing with 39% each year, and as already was mentioned, also the revenue of these companies is very closely tied to how much data they process, which is then very closely tied to the energy they consume. So for example, for Amazon, their profits increase if they have more data being processed, which then consumes more energy, and that's sort of the loop that we're in right now. And then there was one other paper that says that by now, 2020, you would have about 20 billion devices that could be connected to the internet, and this is expected to grow to 80 billion devices in 2030. And as you also mentioned at the beginning, these devices not only consume a lot of energy, but also they require a lot of raw materials that have to be in there. So I think it's a lot broader than only the energy consumption or the electricity consumption, I'm sorry, about these devices and about digital sustainability, but it's a broader perspective of, well, things that we have to address, because in the end, by 2030, if we want to limit to 1.5 degrees, then we have to halve our carbon emissions. And I believe last year we grew actually in the greenhouse gas emissions. So we have only 6 years left to halve our emissions. And you asked, should we focus on one sector? Well, I think we should focus on all, but given the growth rates of the digital sector, then we definitely have a huge problem there.
Good. I have one last question that I want to give to you. Is there something like a green, fully sustainable data center?
Yeah, the one we don't build, right? That's always... No, but I'm serious, right? The starting point should always be, what is the most sustainable data center? The one we don't have to build, right? That has to be the foundation. Everything we build, concrete, servers, comes with carbon, comes with resource consumption. I want to reframe the discussion we just had, because I think it's a very useless discussion. Show me one sector, one country, one policy, one strategy that currently does not bet on digitalization as the solution to all of their problems, right? So I think we can all agree, it doesn't matter what the energy consumption is today, what the resource consumption is today, that digital will somehow go up, right? you already see what happens when you give basically people enough computing power. They come up with ChatGPT, and this just goes on and on and on. And I think it's pretty obvious that this might not be the most important sector to decarbonize right now, but it's probably the one where we really need to manage that it doesn't become the next one that we have really trouble decarbonizing, right? Look at how hard it is to get rid of cars after you gave everyone one, right? Try to get rid of ChatGPT after everybody's using it already, right? So now is the moment to put in safeguards to make the growth sustainable, even though that's already a bit of a hypocrisy in itself, but at least to make sure we are not making it hard for ourselves to fix it afterward, I think.
Good. So it is possible to be pro data center and pro sustainability.
I'm
It's not
pro
an-
digital, pro data
Exactly.
center.
We don't
but
have to go back to Stone Age, right? Yeah, I always think that there is, of course, a strong incentive to increase more and more the demand and the share. If you like movies, then maybe you remember this movie with, now I forgot my own joke. That's too bad. Matrix, exactly. You know, where all these humans are sitting in these little batteries and producing with their human body energy for the machines to live on. So that's not where we want to end. In fact, we also want to protect the planet, and we want to be able to build data centers in the European Union that are reconciling sustainability targets and at a high level. That is the idea. And with that, I actually want to invite you to also discuss with us. Share, please, your name, and then you can ask questions. Please address your question to one of the panelists if you have a specific one, or if you want to give a position, that is also okay for a short moment. Yeah? Thank you very much. I give the mic, or maybe would you help me? Or you can go around. So just show signal and you are able to talk. We start here in the front, this gentleman. It's working.
So my name is Srikar, and my question is, shouldn't we looking one step back where the consumption starts, right? Like obviously, as you said, Amazon, Azure, all of them are rapidly expanding because they see demand, and they are creating demand with more AI companies, more like tech companies in general. Like if I look back at my childhood, having one landline phone at home back where I grew up in India was sufficient to be connected. Now all of us have phones, multiple phones with multiple apps to get in touch with each other. So shouldn't there be a sort of labeling system in place, like how you have with nutrition labeling on food, on what is the use of a particular company, and then the pricing done accordingly for the data consumption they'd be having, so that you curtail the demand, in a sense also tax it accordingly, so that then you can stop this rapid expansion just from a capitalistic standpoint.
It's a brilliant idea. I know there are people working on this. There are two avenues. One is this nutrition label idea. The other one is that every digital technology has to undergo in sustainability on environmental impact assessment, and that therefore everything is mapped out what exactly are the inputs. But I can ask you, would you change your consumption, your service? Would you stop using a certain service because you think it is consuming too much energy? How effective is that likely to be that we have a label?
I would argue attaching weight to digital services, data, whatever you want to do is definitely helpful. I think consumption is the right question. There is a discipline in our society that is responsible for building most of software, which is where I come, software engineers. And I think that even in my circles, I do a lot of talks in front of a lot of software engineers that sometimes are like, what? I didn't know we are consuming this much energy. And I think there is an educational piece there, and then there is the transparency piece, which you mentioned, to kind of label services and give them the feeling of weight. I think other discussions around limiting the consumption of digital services are highly discouraged in the current dialogue, I feel. Saying we don't want AI is not really the mantra. So these other two options, I think, are the ones that are more accepted by the current debate.
Thank you. Let's take more questions. There's this gentleman in the blue shirt after them. Okay.
Yeah, just a comment on that. I think that the concept of a carbon footprint was invented by the fossil fuel industry to make us believe that individual agency is more significant than systems level change. So the idea that any individual agency is going to have a significant impact is kind of a delusion in many ways, and that's why I think that doesn't really make sense to think of it as an individual problem. It's a system level problem. But I'm concerned, I guess, about the fact that people are focused on things like carbon footprint and things like that, when our most immediate and pressing problem, which you've sort of touched on a little bit, is energy availability and security, right? And we saw this when Putin invaded Ukraine. The standard of living in Germany dropped lower, more than it has since the 1950s, right? And the major data center markets now are constrained primarily by energy availability. The thing that's constraining the data center industry is not any of the conversations we're having. It's the fact that you can't get a data center connected to the grid. And if you can, and if you consume energy, you're pushing the whole energy system towards increased use of fossil fuels. So we really need to be having conversations about the energy proportionality of that whole system, which is the rate at which it consumes energy relative to the rate at which useful work is being done. And I feel like these kind of conversations need to shift more to that focus on energy. I'm curious how the panelists feel about this, versus things like carbon footprints, which can be greenwash, which can be, sort of made to use as virtue signaling, as a way to try to jump the queue to get access to energy, which is why companies want to look like they have low carbon footprints. So when it comes time to allocate energy, they're going to say, well, we belong at the front of the queue because we use more renewables than anyone else.
Yeah, that's a very valuable contribution, because it's true that at the moment the main limitation is to connect the data center is really if the power grid can actually still carry it. And we also have discussions that we see in Ireland actually at the moment, that the Irish environmental minister says you not just only have to use sustainable energy sources when you are want to build a new data center, but you also have to be able to produce yourself these sustainable energy sources, not just being connected to the grid and then claiming you are using green energy. So this is a very interesting ramification, let's say. But I agree with this. The worry I have when we are focusing only on the ability of the grid to be able to carry more data centers is that we see it as a technological solution that we have to enhance the grid, to build more capacity in there, and that we are this way not taking on board that we need the most neutral data centers in terms of consumption and use. You want to add something? That was a very good point.
I would just quickly respond to that by saying I think it gets back to this question of what actually is sustainable energy, right? Because there's so much confusion and conflict over what that actually means. From what I understand, the latest interest in the tech industry is to move towards nuclear power to power data centers. And that gets to like a decades-old debate among the environmental and climate justice movements over whether we can even consider nuclear power to be a sustainable source of energy for society, and what other kinds of risks and questions are brought up amidst that. So I think it does I think it points us towards needing to more fundamentally, again, ask why we are building a certain thing, and getting very clear about priorities. Yeah.
Priorities is a very good point.
Can I just, to the point this morning, just because it's such a beautiful thing, and yes, they're thinking about nuclear. How big are companies that are thinking about building their own nuclear power plants? That's usually something that countries can barely afford to do, and these companies have enough cash flow to consider building large-scale nuclear facilities, building their own power plants. So they are always a good number. Microsoft's free cash flow, 44 billion, that's the equivalent of Shell.
But that's in the US, not in the European Union. They are not going to build
power
power
plants. No, here they build
plants
sustainable gas turbines.
Let's get more there was the gentleman in the light blue shirt here. Yes.
My name is Ruud Knijn. I work for the ICT department of the University in Hogeschool. And it's a little side step, but a little step we could make is stop sharing these kinds of pictures. You described visiting a data center, and I visited recently one of our little data centers locally here at Science Park. And if you put your hand in the racks, you actually feel the heat. It's not green. It are steam engines. So that's a little contribution in awareness that what we do every day, it takes energy and it produces heat. That's a little contribution. Stop sharing this kind of marketing pictures.
Yeah, I didn't do it.
No,
but I can tell you that it is always so difficult to find meaningful images for digital technology. I don't know how, but that's generally a problem in my business. But thank you, very well taken.
Because data centers are ugly. Yeah.
And yes, also from the outside, by the way. We have here, yes? Please say your name.
Hi, I'm Jeremy. I'm a student at the VU's Master's in Sustainable Software Engineering. I'm actually curious, so the panelist in red has repeatedly talked about breaking up these hyperscalers and having more local data centers. My impression as someone who's actually worked on projects deployed on those data centers is that they won not because they were bigger or cheaper, but because it's actually much more convenient to deploy to them. Because if I build a project that's working in Amsterdam and then I want to actually expand my customer base, it's essentially like turnkey, and I simply can have customers all over the world. Whereas like a more local infrastructure, it would actually be very hard to then scale your business across geographic lines. So I'm curious if you have an answer as to what you would want to do to make this not encounter these problems.
Well, I think it's again also a bit of a discussion on the competition because what I recently saw was that a professor from I study artificial intelligence, and a professor recently cited some article stating that these models, for example in AI, are getting so big that we cannot even train them anymore at the university. And I think it's the same with these big companies, that probably your local data center wants to help you out with these things, but then they would need to have the capacity to do so, and only these big companies could do so. So I think that's also helping them indeed to get more and more convenient, and also having such a big market share.
Yeah, so I love this question. It's completely correct. I think there's I'm not an economist, but I spend a lot of time in economics on cloud, and I built a very large model that shows that yes, it's super convenient, but because they have the capacity financially to absorb underutilized hardware. So in a way, you get this like, oh, I just get a server for an hour, right? But what if that server, you're not paying for it? Somebody always is paying for it, right? And these companies can build a certain scale, and that scale, and also using virtualization technology and others, they essentially absorb the risk of somebody not using the server. And to have that, if you talk to a local cloud provider here, like Leaf Cloud in Amsterdam or North Sea, it doesn't have hardware in that sense, you always hear that we can't afford that. And that's again to the competitive point. Yes, if you have a bookstore that generates 20 billion a year in revenue, and you pump all that into a cloud business, you can do a lot of really amazing, convenient things. It's like having this delivery guy standing at your door all day, having food ready for you, and the company absorbing the risk of you not being hungry, right? That's literally the same model.
Yeah, that's true. That syncs a little bit with this data sovereignty discussion that we have in the European Union. But at the moment, something is going in the wrong direction, because every public authority, every business, every university, we are all paying a monthly fee to very large cloud providers. This is what Varoufakis called cloud feudalism. In a way, if whole Europe, whole Africa, the whole every continent basically pays this markup, for every transaction every month, then we are creating a quite unlucky, let's say, dependence. And it is possible, maybe not with artificial intelligence, with the very high models, but it is possible to do many more things differently, smaller, more local, exactly. It's not beyond. The problem is that companies and organizations like the university, for example, we are looking at the price and we are not exactly developers, so we want also the convenience of being able to exploit maintenance and also the availability of the service 24/7 to another entity. And that makes this convenience makes us actually so very dependent actually on the large cloud providers. We have more statements. Men with the scarf, please. Where are the ladies actually?
I can change my gender.
No, you don't have to do that.
Okay. I'm pretty naive. My name is Bert Menko. I'm pretty naive about all this stuff, but I've not heard the word of cryptocurrency at all tonight. And I found it totally frivolous. And I think a huge part of the whole stuff what you discuss is frivolous use of computing and of media. And I think if you get rid of all the frivolous stuff, I think that would be good.
I totally agree. Very valuable contribution because let's say in the beginning there was no law and regulation nowhere that would actually sanction certain frivolous uses of computing power. And we have seen, especially with cryptocurrencies, that has changed and that whole countries have outlawed and made it illegal to mine cryptocurrencies in their jurisdiction. And they have also shut down server farms and enforced it. Why? Because especially these activities are taking enormous amount of energies and have almost no contribution to public value as opposed to somebody's private value. So it has also created strain on the grid. So there has been actually measures taken. I'm not aware now about European countries, but I know Albania has outlawed it, Kosovo,
Sweden also.
Sweden, yeah. So a number of countries have taken actually radical steps, and it's the first examples that a frivolous compute activity has been outlawed. But very, very good point.
I think there are also countries which kind of specifically use cryptocurrency. If I remember vaguely. I think there are also countries that use cryptocurrency that kind of, I think was
Venezuela tried that, I believe.
Sorry? I think
Venezuela tried to use cryptocurrencies.
Yeah.
But maybe, can I ask a question to her on your behalf to like reframe it a bit? I think because you are a lawyer and I'm really curious about that question. So you outlaw crypto mining in Albania, and then they go to Mongolia and use power plants there, right? And they keep on going somewhere else. What does global governance look like to kind of regulate digital infrastructure and really like embody these discussions that we have, right? Because really, if we outlaw certain, like Amsterdam really pushed back on data centers, yeah, and then they went to Norway and Sweden to a certain extent. How do we get to this global governance model for digital infrastructure?
Global is at the moment, unfortunately, not really where things are heading. What we are seeing is that groups of countries are trying to create value chains that are friendshoring. So we see actually how there are two camps emerging. One is Europe, America, Western democracies, and then we have China and so on. And there's a sort of disintegration at the moment. So global solutions are going to be right now very hard, but you can, of course, already show best practices and set standards. And there are a number of organizations that are trying to do so. What I think, what you have described with this waterbed effect, yeah, that one country closes or has a stricter policy and then it goes somewhere else, That will always happen, but at least within the European Union we can work with that, with the help of all countries. It's, however, not always so harmonious, because some countries also want to attract this type of business, because it is, after all, also something that contributes to the to the gross domestic product. So not all countries are pulling in the right direction at the moment. So as we have seen, for example, Ireland is turning into a giant data center, and some other parts of Europe are also very, very attractive for data center establishment, and they are not really trying to reduce that. And also within the Netherlands, there is, of course, some sort of debate. If Amsterdam doesn't want it anymore, then it will go maybe to Port of Groningen, where there's also a data center development area, or to another, like Kroon van Holland. Yeah? So we have to make choices that are important. So one of the choices is, for example, that we outlaw certain frivolous uses of data center capacity. That is not just, you get your turn, but this is not just the cryptocurrency mining, but you could also wonder if, for example, the metaverse has to be hosted here in the Netherlands. You can also try to make more decisions about if we always need a 100% availability of every information technology that we are having. Because at the moment, many of these backup facilities and so on, we are not anymore allowing ourselves a downtime. Of course, we need a hospital to be always functioning. We need the BSN numbers to be always workable. But are there maybe some backups of websites or some backups of online shops that, if they are for 5 minutes offline, that we can maybe treat differently? So being more smart about these choices. And we need to make choices about what really contributes to our public interest here in the Netherlands. Do we need co-location data centers where companies, hospitals, universities and so on can put their data? Or do we need hyperscalers? Can we have both, or do we need to make decisions in favor of certain types of data centers instead of allowing everyone? So there are ways of still shaping public policy in addition to making data centers sustainable. So then we have the lady here. Hello.
My name is Tineke Bremer, and I'm looking into the sustainable options for the data centers of the Dutch government. And I'm wondering what could be meaningful KPIs to steer towards sustainable data centers?
Good question. I think if you look at the Energy Efficiency Directive of the EU, there is a very long, the Delegated Act, which contains all these performance indicators, contains a long list. I think there's 3 that are interesting. One is the real power consumption. I think there's an aspect of real resource consumption that can be expressed in ADP or in many different metrics. So how much cement goes in there, how much rare earths go in there, which has a big impact on a climate justice perspective. And the third element is water at the moment. But I think water is also a bit misunderstood in the data center world. But I think energy consumption and resource consumption are the ones you want to look at, because at the end of the day, it's about like what goes in here, right? That's energy. What is it made of? And that's the same with a data center. And then what do I get out of it? In this case, you took nodes, so you got nodes out. And it's really that simple. I think that's what we want to monitor and track.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my name is Roy, the one working for North Sea data centers in the past. So, and I think the solution is not in the reuse of AI or crypto or things like that. I think we have to accept that we will use more and more. I think one of the solutions is looking at The cooling of all those systems, you know, I think 1/3 of all the energy is not going to the server, to the workloads themselves, but is used to cool the system. And I think we can make great progress with a lot of people, you know, together. We have smart people. We can reduce that 1/3, and if we can, you know, have the heat from the data centers reuse, we can also make great progress, you know, and make it more sustainable.
Yeah, and we have also seen that in the data center beleid, for example, from the city of Amsterdam. But and in general, the public policy moves towards reusing the heat for especially housing. But the issue is that sometimes this also is not trivial because, for example, there is no human settlement next to the data center, or it is too difficult to transport the heat there, and there are so many things that are still unresolved, that there are brilliant ideas that are not yet in practice. But I would like to go back to the key performance indicators. Isn't there at the moment we are operating with many different indicators, and we have some standards or guidelines from the European Union that is trying to actually harmonize the use of key performance indicators for data center capacity. Still, these are guidelines, they are not legally binding, and we can do more in order to have actually or operate the same benchmarks. There's also an initiative, or several initiatives, but I only know about one, that is from Germany, that they are having a Blue Angel, like Kehrmerk, where data centers that comply with the key performance indicators of this Kehrmerk can actually distinguish themselves, and that is then also something that the public sector can take account of when they are procuring data centers. But otherwise, I need ideas from all of you or from you.
So there's an organization that's been involved in kind of regulating and classifying data centers for many years called the Uptime Institute. Oh, I didn't introduce myself before. My name is Tom Moran. I work in data centers. And so they have just, if you hear about a tier 3 data center, for example, the Uptime Institute are the people who decide what tier 3 actually means. And it means you can run, you know, you can run banking in it, you can run critical information infrastructure in it. And I think to your point, the distinction, and you started to make this point earlier, between information infrastructure that is critical, things like what powers the 911 phone system versus what powers, you know, social media, right, are two fundamentally different things. And today we don't make that distinction, right? But we have to. And the only model that really exists on this scale for ICT infrastructure is the way we've regulated the telecommunications industry, because it was understood to be critical information infrastructure from a relatively early point. As soon as we developed 911 phone systems, we realized, okay, this is critical, right? We need to look at data centers and all ICT infrastructure in the same way and make those classifications, right? I'm sure Rudolf is going to want to comment on that because I brought up telco and that's his thing. But I think the energy proportionality piece of it is what the Uptime Institute has said is the most significant key performance indicator. So if there was one, and it kind of speaks to Mac's point, it would be that notion of how do we correlate the energy consumed to the useful work done, right? And that is the ultimate metric that, you know, the industry is working towards, is figuring out what does that look like.
That's right. And I also realized from the discussion that we are often talking about different things, like the energy use or the energy consumption, the water used, the water that has been consumed. So these are always different things, and the nuances are really important here too. So I think we have now time for one or two more contributions, and I want to definitely give the gentleman Rob in the back the word, and then also you. And then I would like to invite you all for a glass of wine or some other drink, and we can continue the discussion in a more social format, if you agree. We start with Rob.
Yeah, so the weird guy in the back is Rudolf van der Berg. I now work for Stratex Consulting, but I used to work for the OECD in Paris, for the Ministry of Economic Affairs in the Netherlands, and collecting data on how the digital economy functions has been part of what I do for the last 2 decades. And getting it right and explaining what is going on, and also debunking a lot of bullshit that telcos tell governments when it comes to regulating the internet, but also debunking a lot of nonsense about what the electricity use of data centers is, for example. And I'm really sad that the Energy Efficiency Directive didn't go for the 50 kilowatt limit or the 100 kilowatt limit, that for some weird reason both the industry and activists wanted, but 2 countries didn't want, and now we have a 500 kilowatt limit. But that Energy Efficiency Directive will at least give us finally some real data to discuss, because almost everything that's published, except for a few countries, are estimates. And even when we look at those estimates, many of them are statistically wrong. For example, in the Netherlands, the Dutch central government that the lady works for closed 64 smaller data centers and said that its electricity consumption, when it went to 4 larger data centers, some of them commercial co-location, went from 235 gigawatt hours to 128 gigawatt hours. So it saved 100 gigawatt hours. But what do the official statistics of the Dutch CBS say, at least on a sector level? The electricity consumption of the ICT sector rose by 100 gigawatt hours. Yes, but we saved 235 in the government sector, but we don't see the connection between it. What I get paid to do is find those data. Does it mean that I want data centers built everywhere? No. Should we do AI everywhere? No, I'm still very skeptical of some of that stuff, but that's also because I was very positive about AI in 2011 and then it didn't happen, so I got burned. I wrote against cryptocurrencies when I was at the OECD, but I forgot about how bad financial systems are in many places in the world and how gullible people are. But we also have to worry. That piece by Alex de Vries on AI energy consumption is nonsense. It is extrapolations based on extrapolations, and it's not fact, and it's not scientifically good and methodologically good. Worse, it's what the IEA based its entire report on, because they lost George Camilla, who was pretty decent at his work, and he went to work somewhere else. And then they had a couple of other guys write it, and that was basically their own source. But really, dear academics, please learn about how stuff works. Learn about what the data are behind the data. Read the sources. Many academics estimate that data growth will lead, in telecom networks, will lead to more electricity consumption because kilowatt hour per gigabyte. It's a nonsense metric. It's like counting the energy consumption of streetlights by the amount of cars that drive past. The electricity consumption of a network link is stable, despite, irrespective of how much traffic we do. And what do we see in real telecom networks? In fixed networks, it's declining. In France, electricity consumption of mobile networks is increasing because the government is building more sites, not because of more data, etc., etc. But really, let us first get good data and then make sure that this doesn't blow up in our face, definitely, but.
Thank you, that is helpful, and if you feel like sending me a few sources, then I would be grateful so that I can triangulate with what I have already collected. Yeah? Okay.
Can I just add one very small thing to this, because I want to protect also the academics of it. We are both very technical. I know now who you are, and hello. Look, I'm a nerd, you're a nerd. That's pretty obvious. I think we both know that everything you say is correct, but there is no public data sets on most of these things that any academic can work with. Why? Because the digital tech sector lives from intransparency. That's the whole mantra is, no, but come on. Cisco doesn't want to give data. Microsoft doesn't want to give data. None of them want to give...
You can have your personal exchange over a beer in a moment, okay? I want to now have you with your statement, and then we are closing down.
Thank you. Hi, I'm David. I work in tech companies running data analytics companies, but or data analytics teams. Really interested in moving more into the climate space in data. I'm glad Tom brought up telecommunications because I'm curious to hear your thoughts on relating data infrastructure to our other infrastructures, to our other public or private utilities. We talked a lot here about what infrastructures go into it, energy, water consumption. But I'm curious, we've also talked about the benefits, and it seems to be a consensus that there's so many incredible benefits that have come from this. We don't want to move back to a previous data center age. Why not provocatively consider data infrastructure as a national or global utility that needs to be done? I understand the capitalist reasons for against that, but let's talk about that. And I'm curious your thoughts on why not for something that is so critical and that doesn't directly help us towards sustainability. You could do that in an unsustainable way, but it certainly might help. And to your point about AWS's profits being directly tied to energy consumption. So I'd like to hear data infrastructure talked about related to other infrastructures and potentially as a public or global utility.
This is a good prompt for you to give a final comment, maybe. Do you want to?
So I think I agree to some extent, though I think it's also not that black and white that if we don't go on that strategy that we have to go back to the age before the data center. But, as discussed elaborately today, there are also a lot of operations that, do they really add anything to our life? Like what Tom was saying about what is critical and what is not. Personalized advertisement, it costs a lot of data. Do we really need that? It could be nice, but you can live without, right? I think that's more of the discussion that we should have. And of course there are benefits. Public transport, for example, is a lot better with data. I have an app myself and I can see when a train is late and then I know it, and these things are nice. But I think we really have to look at what really adds value to our lives and what also could maybe be left out. And that ties back, I think, to the discussion and who's also the person to decide that, or the institution, because now we leave it with the companies that profit from them. And I think that's a bit of we leave ourselves out there.
You already saw my thumbs up, right? So I'm pro. One sentence to that. Even Keynesian economics, right, the godfathers of capitalism, said that certain things should not be privately owned. And what they mentioned was utility like infrastructure, water, energy. And I would argue if we say this is critical infrastructure, our digital future, we base our entire economy on it and our entire society on it, right? Then we might as well say it's a utility. And if it's a utility, especially in Europe, I would argue that some parts of it could be nationalized. And I think that's maybe not a bad idea. Also make a lot of money with that.
I really like to end on this harmony, yeah? Although I'm a little bit skeptical about that we are living in capitalistic society and that we are not having the tradition to nationalize so easily things, but I also believe we should think towards directions that are bringing data centers in line with the public value and the common good, instead of allowing that to be fully run by others for us in ways that are not sustainable for society. With that, I want to thank my panelists. Thank you for being here today, for making yourself available, sharing your insights. I really, really enjoyed it. But I believe you also deserve a big thanks, because I learned a lot from your interventions, questions, some really, really good remarks. Great that you could come. I'm grateful to SPAU 25 for having us, for being such good hosts, and for being a location that always allows us to meet with the audience and people from the city. And with that, let's move towards the social part of the evening and continue the discussion there. Thank you.